I did a video a little while ago that talked about some tools for the solo GM and some bigger concepts in thinking about being a solo GM. And those involved things like using generative resources, using things that are restrictive, using certain rubrics. And based on that video, I want to make 3 points about the solo GM mindset that I have in my mind when I do sessions for myself. The first one is that everything is playing, that everything I think about, everything I do with regard to my session is part of the session, and I'll talk about what I mean by that in a second. Second, it's okay not to sweat the details, that it's important to come in and out of details of the rubric or system that you're using and feel comfortable in doing that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And finally, it's important not to forget the G in RPG, not to forget how certain game mechanics can help you move a narrative along. And I'll talk about that too. The first point, that everything is playing, I think is probably the most important one, because what happens, or what I find sometimes, is I want to do some kind of solo session and I just start to go through rule books and think, well, maybe I want to do this, or maybe I want to do that, or I download a PDF and it starts to look interesting and maybe I do some character creation, but I just never really get beyond that. And sometimes it starts to feel like a failure. But I realize too that if you think about what you're doing, all of it, even this part of it, as part of the process, as part of being a solo GM, and in fact, as having a solo GM experience, it starts to feel a little less frustrating. Because the fact of the matter is, even if you're just reading rule books, even if you're just creating characters and then quote unquote abandoning what you're doing, that's still being a solo GM. That's still experiencing the RPG world that can be so rich, even if it isn't fully developed. And I think that this is the first important point to make, that everything is playing when you're a solo GM, even if it just ends up being trying to find a system, generating a character, and moving on. That's okay. The second point that I want to make has to do with the details that you choose to use or not in your own experience. And for this part of the video, I'm just going to refer to Starfinder because I have it out. I'm working with it for another video that's going to demonstrate how I put some of these concepts actually into use. What I mean by this is, in theory, and I guess to some extent in reality, we all know when we're approaching, say, a rule set like this, or really any other RPG rule set that's not explicitly like a light one, there's just tons of material that, we couldn't possibly use. I mean, I guess some of us could, but I know that I can't. But I think that in this video, because I'm talking about the mindset, what I want to emphasize is that sometimes I can psych myself out, I guess, really, where I say to myself, oh yeah, I'm really interested in this feats section, which I am, of this rule set, and I look in detail and I really follow along in terms of the actual rule set, and maybe I even go beyond it. I want more feats for my character. Well, my character's level 1. Well, you know what? So what? I'm going to do what I want to do, and I feel okay about that. But then other times I'll get to something like, here's, like, for example, this tactical section of the rule book, and honestly, I'm not that interested in it for the story that I'm telling, and I will skip over it or gloss over it. But sometimes if I think too hard about it, I think, well, I'm really not doing justice to the rule set that I have chosen to abide by, and if you have no boundaries, then, what's the point, really? But I think in terms of a mindset, here's another great one in here, Starships. This material, I think, is amazing to read, and yet I know I would never, ever, ever create my own starship in this system. Absolutely not. I don't have the wherewithal to do it. I'm amazed at the detail that is here, and I've read through it, and I enjoy reading through it to kind of understand how you might build a starship and how you would refit it and upgrade it, but I'm just not going to do it. And I think feeling okay about that and not feeling like you are cheating is an important thing, an important aspect of the mindset of the solo GM. Likewise here for this system that does have magic and spells despite being sci-fi. If you watch my channel, you know I'm really interested in magic, and I'm going to highlight this more than perhaps it is even meant to be highlighted by the designers of this system. Is that disrespectful to the designers? No. It is a flexible system, and when you are the solo GM, you can do what you want. And of course, if you're in a session with not doing this solo, you're just going to be led by whoever the GM is, but you have to lead yourself, and it's important not to psych yourself out and think that you are perhaps going too far in a direction of generalization by skipping over things. Even if it's something so key as weapons. I'm looking for the weapons here. I can't easily find them, but honestly, I skip over all this stuff. There is no way I have interest in determining all these stats about these small arms or any of this. And the heavy weapons, depending on the circumstance, depending on what I'm actually doing, if there's some combat, it's going to be pretty basic because this is my story for myself, and that's okay. And it's important as the solo GM to remember that you're still operating within a system, there's still a structure that you're using, and you still are playing this RPG or whichever RPG you have chosen, even though you are coming in and out of the level of detail that suits you. And the final point I want to make about having a solo GM mindset is to say not to forget the G in the RPG. And what I mean by that is to use game mechanics to help move your narrative forward, to maybe put a little explicit gaminess into the RPG experience, whether you have your session be something like a pick up and deliver or press your luck in some way, or if you're using some elements from other games like little modular tiles, at the outset decide my session is going to end when I have investigated or moved through or whatever, 5 of them or whatever. You could also do something like having an action point allowance and make some determinations about how you allocate what the actions are per character, or if it's a group of characters, per person in the group. You could use impulses for the turns or create some kind of basic sequence of play for yourself. Now, I know that this is going against, in a lot of ways, the concept of an RPG, of course, because it's not a tabletop game. But when you are a solo GM, when you are doing this for yourself, I find that it does help to have some type of external structure to make the sessions a little more explicitly gamey, because that can help you move the narrative forward from point A to point B. And ultimately, I know for myself, when I get stuck at character creation or even just sort of figuring out what system I want to do, it's because I don't really have a plan for moving forward. And you can roll on all the D100 tables you want to generate sort of cool things to see and places to be, but if you're not moving forward, it just becomes an exploration and can stall. Now, is there anything wrong with that? No. And is that not an RPG experience? Absolutely not. I'm not suggesting that. But what I am suggesting is that if you want to create something more like a story where the state changes from the beginning to the end, it can be helpful to use some very simple game mechanics to basically force you to move a little bit forward. Whether that moving forward is to investigate a new place or interact with a new character, that's for you to decide. But I find on my end that if I include a game mechanic into what I'm doing, it can provide the kind of external structure that another GM would provide for me, but that as I am my own GM and also the player, sometimes is lacking.